Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Lavi.
And I'm Tundra Abiola. Our first guest, Laure Beaufils, has been the Deputy High Commissioner to Nigeria since February 2017. Previously, she was the head of the UK Department of International Development in Rwanda and has managed a $100 million portfolio of programs focusing on economic development, governance, and social sectors. Prior to holding this position, she was the lead strategic advisor working for the British Prime Minister in his role as co-chair of the United Nations Secretary-General's high-level panel on post-2015 development agenda. Prior to joining the UK civil service, Laure worked with the UN and civil society organizations and has lived and worked in Rwanda, Ethiopia, India, Cambodia, France, the UK, and the United States. Here to speak on the 60-year relationship between Nigeria and the United Kingdom. Welcome to the morning show, Laure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me
here. Now, the UK government has expressed concern about the suspension and replacement of the Chief Justice of Nigeria so close to the elections. What is the general take on this? And is your government engaging with any of the actors, either in the executive and the judiciary, to sort of create a resolution?
Thank you for that important question. Well, as you know, the UK government considers itself a friend of Nigeria, and we're keen to work with Nigerian and Nigerian people to support deepening democratization in the country. We expressed our serious concern yesterday because, as you know, many organizations, civil society organizations, and indeed the Nigeria Bar Association expressed concern about the constitutionality of what happened to the Chief Justice of Nigeria. And so we have no preference in terms of the outcomes of the elections, but we're looking very closely at issues around the rule of law and constitutionality. And it was important to us to set out that this is something of grave concern. So we are working with all stakeholders. We're not the only ones that have put out a statement. The EU, the US, others have put out statements. And what we're calling for really is a constitutional resolution of the situation to ensure that the rule of law presides. This is really important for the credibility of the elections, so that both people in Nigeria and indeed outside know that the results can be credible. Of course, you know, we were concerned with the process, but the timing is relevant as well. So this is why we felt it was important, and we owed it to the people of Nigeria to set out a statement.
Laura, one of the things you've said in the past around rule of law and how it affects investors and investors' outlook, how do you think this demonstration is going to affect potential investors, current investors, and the way people are looking at Nigeria, especially because that is one of the things, that consistency of the rule of law being enacted is one of the things people look at. How do you think this is going to affect?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that investors are incredibly attracted to Nigeria. It's a massive market. There's so many opportunities, and lots of British businesses in particular find that there's a lot of really great opportunities to seize here, and they're doing well. So that's positive. Of course, you know, what is important for investors as well is stability and rule of law. And the more they see that there are disruptions to that, then they might be concerned in terms of wanting to invest. And we've seen that there's been a bit of a pause in terms of investment and foreign direct investment in the last few months, and that's possibly due to uncertainty. We hope that will pick up over the course of 2019, as you can imagine.
All fingers are crossed on that.
Indeed.
The United Kingdom's government has also issued a statement expressing their concerns about the potential for violence erupting around the elections, and have outlined the sanctions that they're willing to take against promoters of this violence, including travel bans to the UK, inability to access UK funds, possibility of prosecution under international law. But looking at the current situation in Venezuela, where the UK government has gone even further to issue an ultimatum to the government of Nicolas Maduro, is this something you would consider in Nigeria as well if it comes to it?
So I think the situations are very different in Venezuela and Nigeria. What we're talking about here in Nigeria is an election. The situation in Venezuela has been very serious for a very long time and degrading. And, you know, 10% of Venezuelans have left the country because there's absolute chaos right now. So what we're looking at in Nigeria is very different. However, we really want to be clear that for those that encourage or use violence for electoral purposes or to influence the result of the elections, there will be consequences. And I think it's the right thing to do and say, as Friends of Nigeria, to make it clear that that would happen, because it is our biggest concern that the election should be peaceful and violence-free.
But the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, in his tweet regarding Venezuela, did not refer to violence at all. He was talking about vote rigging. And that is what gave the UK the impetus to declare that government illegitimate, because the elections were rigged. The statement regarding Nigeria from the UK has been about violence. I suppose what I'm trying to find out is if you're willing to expand the scope and to sort of penalize not just people promoting violence, but people who are found guilty of other electoral malpractice.
So we've been very clear that we are looking at all forms of electoral malpractice, and it's important to say also that we're working with all stakeholders to ensure that the elections are fair, almost to ensure that we can have processes that are incredibly robust. And we will have observers across the country ensuring that we're able to monitor what's going on. So we are looking at all forms of intimidation or malpractice, as you say, and we will work to call them out. But I don't think that the parallel with Venezuela is adequate, because it's been a decade of hardship in Venezuela that has led to where we are today, whereas here we're talking about an election that really matters for the people of Nigeria and indeed for the whole continent and to friends of Nigeria like the UK, but it's not the same situation.
As you observe, I mean, you've been here for the last 2 years. You've now seen the preparations leading up to the elections. Do you believe Nigeria is adequately prepared to have free and fair elections? And if not, what are some of the last-minute things we need to do?
So I think a lot of work has gone into preparing for the elections. I think technically INEC has made a lot of progress. Clearly, there's been a lot of effort done on the technical aspects to prepare for the elections. I think we need to really encourage people to get their PVCs and go out and vote. And one of the things we've been working on in particular is ensuring that women, disabled people, marginalized groups get out and express their vote. So if there's anything we can do still at this point, it's really calling on people to do that and ensuring that they do so in a way that is genuinely expressing their preferences and their views, so that there's no intimidation. But a lot has been done. I think we recognize that there's no such thing as ever perfectly prepared, and there's always more that can be done. But if we respect the process so far and ensure that the rule of law is abided to and that votes are not manipulated, I think we will have a good election.
And shifting a little bit into security and some of the issues around Boko Haram and other forms of terrorism, and especially ISIS West Africa, which you've actually mentioned a couple of times, that they have been responsible for some of the Northeast, for some of the violence in the North. What do you think? I mean, there's been criticism that the British government has not been as helpful to Nigerians when it comes to the issue of terrorism. What is your position on that, and what work are you doing with the Nigerian government around terrorism?
So I would challenge that we've not done enough. I think we are very active and very supportive, and it is a priority for us to work with the government of Nigeria to support peace, stability, and address terrorism. So we have a strong package of support working across development, humanitarian, military, and intelligence sectors for the Northeast. And that is, in fact, going up and continuing to increase. And we provide support to the multinational joint task force to support the Northeast. And we provide technical assistance and capacity development to the military to defeat Boko Haram. So I think we're doing our part. In fact, we're stepping up. When the Prime Minister was here in August this year, we also signed a security and defense pact. So this is all a strong statement of our support and our willingness to play our part in defeating terrorism.
I wanted to ask you about that security and defense agreement. When is the commencement date, and what can we expect?
So I think it's live, and what you can expect is continued collaboration, sharing of information, capacity development, and that support that I mentioned across military, intelligence, and development to ensure that we have peace and stability in the Northeast in particular.
Will you be providing training for our soldiers?
We already are, a lot.
I was going to say, do we have any wins that we can talk about from this pact already that's already live?
It's difficult to see the wins on a daily basis when actually there's still so much suffering in the Northeast and displacement and poverty. But from a humanitarian perspective, we're providing £200 million of support over 4 years to the people of the Northeast to help on everything from education to nutrition. And as I said, we're training very many troops of the Nigerian military to really step up and be able to provide top expertise in addressing the situation in the Northeast.
Also talking a little bit more about some of the things that happened during the Prime Minister's visit, one of the things that happened was really talking about investment and increasing the level of investment. Currently, the level of trade between Nigeria and the UK is about 4.2 billion pounds. Right. And your plan and some of the pronouncements that were made was to increase that, but to double that by 2030. What are some of the areas that you're specifically looking at, and what are some of the low-hanging fruits that you've seen to take advantage of?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, the Prime Minister made a commitment for the UK to be the #1 G7 investor in Africa by 2022. And obviously, we want that to be the case in Nigeria, and we're already starting from a really strong base. So we already have a lot of British investments in the country, and we want to do a lot more. So what we want to do is work with British investors to really help them better understand and navigate the landscape in Nigeria. Nigeria is a bit challenging for people that don't know it. It's a bit, rather than challenging, I should say it's a little bit of a difficult one to understand and navigate. So we can provide advice, we can provide insights, we can help investors telling them where there are sectors that are growing, where we see potential, where we see that there are gaps in the market, and that's what we are doing. We're recruiting people to come and help us specifically on the investment front, and we're going to be much more proactive. In fact, we already are in our engagements with investors, setting out the case for investing in Nigeria. We should also highlight another commitment that the Prime Minister made when she was here, namely the UK-Africa Investment Summit that is due to take place this year, most likely in the autumn. And that's going to be a great opportunity for British investors and the key actors in the City of London to come together with African and in particular Nigerian business opportunities for some sort of matchmaking and real focused, concrete discussions of the opportunity for investment. So that's on the investment side. On the trade side, as you mentioned, we do aim to double our trade, our bilateral trade, and we can see that there are lots of sectors in which we can do that. So we have a team now that's working on education, financial services, infrastructure, IT, a broad range of sectors beyond the more traditional oil and gas to ensure that we are aware of the pipeline, aware of the opportunities, and that we're really clear where British expertise and businesses can add value to Nigerians' development. And this is intended to be a real win-win, if you like, because we bring our expertise, we support job creation by so doing in Nigeria, we support wealth creation in Nigeria, and of course in the UK as well.
I know you called out Fintech as one of the areas that you're specifically looking at.
Yeah.
Have you guys done any more work in that area?
Absolutely. So yet another thing that was announced when the Prime Minister came is UK-Africa Fintech Partnership. And that's really exciting, specifically in Nigeria, where it's already coming to life. What we're doing there is providing grants through an organization called EFINA, which we fund, which does financial inclusion. So we provide grants to a select group of fintech organizations. We'll be doing also some coaching and mentoring. There was a first conversation, if you like, of the fintech partnership between fintech organizations in Africa that were in Lagos and a group in the UK just a few months ago, and in fact it was chaired by the Prime Minister's Fintech envoy. So it's a really high-level conversation. It's a really key priority for us. If fintech entrepreneurs are listening, please do get in touch, because it's something where we think we've got a lot to offer. We've got a lot of experience. We've got all kinds of investors, again, that are willing and eager to engage with fintech organizations. And the other thing I should say here is that we're also working with regulators on fintech to ensure that there is a conducive environment for fintech firms to grow here in Nigeria.
You also undertake numerous projects, from training tech startups, financing fashion and film entrepreneurs, supporting various NGOs. How do you go about selecting where your support can be best utilized, and what for you is most personally fulfilling?
Gosh, there's so many interesting questions in one, aren't there? So, well, as the UK, we have several government departments and several priorities, if you like. So the UK's Department for International Development is clearly focused on poverty reduction. And it's got a program of about £300 million a year bilaterally to do that. And that covers everything from strengthening institutions, in particular institutions of accountability. We were referring to the elections earlier, so DFID also provides a lot of support to deepening democratization and governance in the lead up to the elections. Lots of support to INEC in particular. Of course, it does humanitarian, which is essential and not optional, really, and then invest in the people of Nigeria from an education perspective, from a health perspective. All of these are real key priorities alongside the economic development work that we've spoken about, which is really also focused on job creation, a massive priority. So that's the DFID aspect of things. You mentioned creative industries. So we're currently working with the British Council to support young entrepreneurs in the creative industry sector. In particular, right now we have a program of support in film and fashion as two incredibly dynamic sectors in Nigeria. And we're very proud about that because the creative industries are in fact one of the fastest growing industries, both in Nigeria and in the UK. And we think these are areas where there's such huge potential for further partnership and collaboration between the talent, the youth, the creativity here in Nigeria and that in the UK. So we want to create those bridges, those conversations, that two-way learning, those exchange of ideas and creative juices, if you like. And we think that's another case of win-win. We think it's sectors that are sometimes not sufficiently talked about as job-creating sectors, and yet they are some of the most positive, vibrant success stories in Nigeria. So that's the story behind this current focus on creative industries. And of course, you know, it's something we are proud about as the UK as well. And we think that it's a perfect area to demonstrate how the two countries could be working together and going from strength to strength together.
One of the things she asked you was, what do you find personally most fulfilling? Because I've seen you be involved in some very interesting projects, and I would like for you to talk more about that. One of the things I've seen you really throw your hat behind is around child sexual abuse and the importance of addressing that. Tell us more about that.
So I feel incredibly strongly as a woman, but also as a citizen about violence, and particularly violence against women and girls and children more broadly. And it is something that I feel strongly about, and I find very fulfilling to work on that. But of course, it's a priority for the government as well. We have a foreign secretary that's committed to working on women's rights as a foreign policy issue, and it's the right thing to do. So it's something that I spend quite a lot of time talking about, convening people around. I think we need to talk about violence a lot more, and sexual violence a lot more. It needs to be a subject that I think voters should bring to the table when talking about what they expect their governments to do for them, to make it a priority to invest in keeping children safe and protected from sexual violence, and that the perpetrators of violence should undergo due judicial process and be punished. I think that's a really important conversation to be had, and we need to break the silence around violence. We need to break the stigma and the shame associated with the victims of violence and recognize that actually they are indeed the victims, and the shame should go with the perpetrators. And I think we also need to educate people as to what is right and wrong, some people think, I'm told, I hear that sometimes violence against girls is part of growing up. Well, it's not. It's against the law. It is a violation of people's rights, and it is unacceptable. And I think it's the right thing to talk about this. So that, I think, partly answers your question. I feel very strongly and passionately about this, as you can see. And I hope it's a conversation that more people have. And I hope it's a conversation that more men have, because it's not a woman's issue.
It's really not.
It's
all of us.
Absolutely. It's a societal, it's a human rights issue.
Yes.
Totally.
So you've raised this point about the message, the issues that voters should be demanding of our political parties. What do you think of the climate that has been created by the political parties in terms of the kind of topics that they're discussing, the kind of information that's being disseminated? Do you think that it's on target, it's on message in terms of the important issues that are facing Nigeria at the moment? Or are we being so distracted by these partisan spats that are going on?
So I think, I think all parties have manifestos. I think all the manifestos do recognize some of the very big challenges that Nigeria faces. Poverty, first and foremost. So, we have 87 million people in Nigeria living in extreme poverty. Yes. That's less than $1.90 a day. It's more people in extreme poverty in this country than anywhere else in the world. And in fact, there are 4 people going into extreme poverty in Nigeria per minute. So, that's a very, very important political issue. All candidates have recognized this. All of them have recognized the need for further job creation, diversification of the economy, continuing to address corruption, and focusing on peace and stability, and addressing extremism. So all of these issues are there, and I think it's been fantastic to see debates, all political parties willing to debate, to lean in, to have conversations. I think we should have as much of that as possible, so that voters really know whom they're voting for and what they stand for, and that's part of a democratic process. But yes, you're right. There are also personalities at stake. There's also partisan politics. There's also that aspect of things which at times can distract from the fundamental issues. And I think there's also, a need for, as I was saying early on, voter education, so people can demand a campaign that is focused on the issues rather than on the individuals. And we, as voters, as citizens, have a responsibility to also make sure that we ask the right questions, and that we are savvy in demanding answers from our political leaders or potential candidates. And clearly the media has a fantastic and important role to play, and it's fantastic that there's a lot of media houses in the country asking probing questions and focusing on substance and policies rather than just partisan issues.
One of the criticisms to the UK government has been its lack of more cooperation, or more active cooperation, around the issues around anti-corruption, and especially around recovery of loot that has been stashed in the UK. How do you address this, and then what progress and what news do we have on this front, and what wins have you had? I know you have some wins you've talked about in the past. Yeah. Do you have updates? Please tell us more about how you're cooperating with Nigeria on corruption. So
corruption is a big priority for us, and across everything that we do, we emphasize the need to continue to address corruption. We emphasize our zero tolerance approach to corruption, and that's from our commercial relationships to our programming. Everything does have an element focused on corruption. So, for example, on our commercial business relationship, we have an Anti-Bribery Act, which means that British businesses have to abide by that act, and if not, they are contravening the law in the UK. So that's on the business side. Now, to come to the specific of your question about what we're doing to recover stolen assets, it is a priority, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The UK government has no intention to keep a single pound of Nigerian money that has been looted and taken to the UK at all. That said, it does take a long time to recover assets, because some of these legal proceedings are incredibly complex and very time-consuming, and it takes a lot of time to gather all the evidence, the data, the information that is needed to put together a case that is absolutely robust, so that it cannot then be disqualified because it has a few shortcomings. And so what I think you will find is that we are going to see more and more outcomes of cases that are ongoing, and obviously for legal reasons I can't name any individual or tell you exactly what is happening, but there's a lot that's going on in the UK right now. We've got a lot of officers focused on recovering the loots and bringing them back. But there have already been assets that have returned, as you know, so it won't be the first time, but there'll be more coming, and we are determined to support the people of Nigeria and determined to ensure that return assets come back and are invested in the people to promote development and poverty reduction.
And to create more anti-laundering,
totally
robust regulation.
Yeah. And we work bilaterally on that. We work through the international community on that. We've got a lot of work going on to support the drive to address corruption here.
How would you like to see the Nigerian government tackle the problem of the growing number of out-of-school children?
Well, there's only one way to do that, quite frankly, and that's investing in education. I mean, it's really important to invest in education in general. I would say girls' education in particular. We know that investing in education is one of the most effective and value for money investments that can be made in all countries around the world. So we believe firmly that there's a case to invest in all people, all young people. I think it is a right and to ensure that every child can develop his or her talent and potential and be able to be the best that he or she can be. I think there's so much talent in Nigeria, it's so obvious, and there's so much talent that is untapped. And if it were able to develop, if some of these raw diamonds were able to become real diamonds, it's so very likely that the country would grow, that would be further development, business opportunities, job creation, etc. It's a fundamental thing to continue to invest in human development. And I think the government recognizes that. The World Bank put out a new indicator at their meeting in Bali a few months ago, which is the human capital indicator. And predictably, Nigeria didn't fare very well. And as a result, the Vice President has chaired a meeting to consider what the government can do to address that, and it's got a really strong plan to do more and to invest in education and health in particular to support that.
I know DFID has quite a number of programs around girls' education and girls' empowerment. How are those programs helping get more kids in and out of school?
So, we believe that the best way to affect change is not necessarily for us to kind of build the schools and train the teachers ourselves, but to work with stakeholders that are then going to be able to do that themselves. So we build the capacity of these stakeholders. We support them in developing curriculum. We support them in encouraging girls to come to school and to really also change attitudes towards girls' education, so that parents recognize that the education of girls is just as important as the education of boys. So there's a wide variety of programs on that. And of course, there are programs specifically looking at education in a humanitarian context as well, supporting kids and girls in particular in IDP camps.
Now, the term special relationship traditionally refers to the US and the UK, but is there a special feature of the bilateral relationship between the UK and Nigeria?
I think so.
What is it?
Well, I mean, we've got a really rich history. We've got so much in common. We are part of the Commonwealth. We share the same language. We share similar features in our education system. We've got a great flow of people between the UK and Nigeria, both sides. We think there's a real understanding between our two countries. And significantly, we really share the same values as well, right? So, yes, we think there's a really strong relationship, and this is why we're so keen to support Nigeria on everything that we as a government do when it comes to overseas and foreign affairs relationships. So we work from development, corruption, peace and stability, everything, all of the issues that we've discussed, commercial investment, we do here with our partners in Nigeria, precisely because it's such an important country and it's such an important relationship for us. And it's going from strength to strength, and we expect that to remain the case for a very, very long time.
On the issue of bilateral relationship, as Britain goes into as the UK goes into a post-Brexit world, hopefully you guys will have a deal by the end, in a couple of months, or not. We'll see what happens. First of all, what is your take on the current situation in the UK with the latest foiling of the Brexit deal, and what opportunities can we talk about when it comes to what a post-Brexit world is going to look like for the Nigeria-UK relationship?
So to take the first part of your question, so as you know, the deal that the Prime Minister had proposed was put to Parliament, and Parliament voted against it. It was not in favour of that deal. So the Prime Minister has gone back to speak to all political parties to come up with a deal that is acceptable to all parties and acceptable to Parliament and indeed to the European Union. So we are in that phase of redeveloping a deal. And the Prime Minister has also said that Parliament will have a stronger role in engaging with government on the process so that there's an outcome that everyone can agree to. We're still working to the same deadline. The Prime Minister has been very clear on that. She says that she will ensure we have a deal in place and that we will leave as intended on the 29th of March this year. So that's very much what we're working on. That's what the British people have voted for, and there's absolutely no change of plan when it comes to that. Now, in terms of what that means for our relationship, one of the things that is really significant when it comes to Brexit is our ability to determine our own trade arrangements. And that's one of the things that we're particularly excited about. And that means that we can work with partner countries and agree amongst ourselves what is the trading priorities. So I keep saying that there are real opportunities for our big partners like Nigeria in the future, when we will be really leaning in even more so than now and determining how we want to trade together, what is our priorities, what are the constraints, and where we want to really partner. So I think it's an opportunity, and I think we'll see that our trade can continue to blossom and grow, as we've been talking about. It's already due to double by 2030, and I expect to see more.
There's been talks about a possible extension if Parliament and the Prime Minister don't come to an agreement, or don't have an agreement by the time that it's time to leave, to exit. What do you think, and what are some of the messages you're getting from the UK about an extension?
So I think you're right. Some people are hoping there would be an extension. Some other people are calling for a second referendum. I think the Prime Minister is very clear at this point that that's not the timetable she's working for. She's keen to deliver on her commitment to leave by March 29th this year. And she's working incredibly hard to come up with a solution to enable us to do that. So really what I want to say to your listeners is that's very much still the priority, and Parliament is working day in and day out to make that happen. And we will obviously know a lot more in the weeks to come, but for the time being, there's no talk of extension, and there's no talk of a second referendum at home.
Now, on agriculture, there were reports that Nigerian exports were rejected by the EU for not meeting the standards. After Brexit, the UK standards presumably will change. So is that something that those standards will still be applied, or is there a way to work with Nigerians in the agriculture sector to remove these hindrances to trade?
So I'd like to start by saying that actually a lot of the time people think that some of the challenges to exporting agricultural produce is standards. It's not always standards, actually. A lot of the time it's also about what is the demand coming from the likes of the UK for what products. So there are standards when it comes to some products such as eggs and meat for predictable reasons, but actually when it comes to vegetables and the like, it's often not standards, but just consumer preferences that act as a bit of a trade barrier. When we leave the EU, yes, we will have to make decisions on what are our standards, whether we choose to roll over the ones that are currently being used through the EU standards, or whether we decide to adapt them and to make them our own. That's something that we will be looking at as part of a very wide variety of issues that we will need to consider. And we will undoubtedly consider what's right for both British consumers in terms of standards, because obviously there are issues related to health and hygiene and all that, but also we'll consider what's right from a trade perspective so that we can get a broad variety of products from as many countries as possible and deliver really good products for the British consumers as well as for exporters.
As we go, I mean, because at the end of the day, our whole life is about elections, and no matter what we do, we can't sort of get away from this. As we go into these the next elections in Nigeria, you've been here 2 years, you've been in different parts of the continent. What do you think of the health watch of Nigeria's democracy at this point?
I think there's so many things to celebrate, right? So one of the first things to celebrate about Nigeria is actually a vibrant media, the freedom of speech. It's really quite impressive when you come from other countries to see that people are able to express themselves freely, to gather freely, to use very critical language about one candidate or the other. And so that's a really strong sign of democracy. And there are other strong signs of democracy. There are some robust institutions. There are civil society organizations that are working very hard. Some of the statements that were put out yesterday, for example, suggest that actually there's that freedom of civil society to also express their views like that. Ditto the the Nigerian Bar Association. So there's a lot of very strong things about Nigerian democracy. It is a democracy. People can go and choose to vote. So I think it is a strong story that Nigeria can tell about the journey that it's on. Now, there are challenges. You know them better than I as Nigerians, and many Nigerians face them on a day-to-day basis. And I know it's tough. I know there are a lot of difficulties that people face in their personal lives related to this, and a sentiment of great inequality as well. So these are challenges that can be addressed, will be addressed, and that we are wanting to support Nigeria in addressing. So I think my message is that there are some really strong fundamentals, that it's a journey, that a lot has been achieved and accomplished. And yes, it's not perfect, and there's a lot more to do, but there's progress being made on many different fronts. And I think the elections, in 2015 were a great first, a great success story in terms of a peaceful transition. So it's right to celebrate that and to look at the positives as well as the challenges. And I know that you are all immersed in elections right now.
So we don't see any positives.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And as are we, because, the countdown is there, and there are so many challenges. There's some fake news coming out, which obviously is not true just in Nigeria. It's a problem that social media has created, as well as some of the positive things that it has created in terms of allowing people to have voice. It does also create challenges. But it's important to step back and also recognize that there's some really fundamentally strong basis to this democracy.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to continuing to talk to you more about the Nigeria-UK relationship, and hopefully once you guys have a deal, we'll call you back to come and tell us what that means for a place like Nigeria.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.